What surprises does Google's I/O conference have?
And should you care about voice over LTE?
Welcome to Vertical Hold, the tech show where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm here with the man who puts the G in 4G, Alex Kibnan. Alex, what's new in tech?
Budget MVNO Via has introduced a price guarantee where it'll match competitor prices and gives you a free month's access if you find a better postpaid SIM-only deal. Via's pricing is aggressive, but the rules for the guarantee are pretty strict, with no promotional pricing, for example, taken into consideration.
The National Broadband Network has been forced to suspend its satellite rollout on the west coast of Tasmania until after the federal election, as debate continues whether the region should switch from satellite to fibre to the node. The federal Labor opposition has promised to upgrade parts of Tasmania to fibre if it wins this year's election, although it's yet to clarify its full NBN plan for the rest of the country.
Microsoft's finally announced what will happen when the free period of Windows 10 eligibility expires at the end of July. No, it's not opting for subscription-based Windows as it does with Office 365. Instead, you'll pay the full retail price for Windows 10, which is $179 for the home version, if you fail to upgrade before the 29th of July.
And the first Ultra HD Blu-ray player is finally on Australian shelves, with Samsung beating Panasonic to the punch. Samsung's player sells for $599, while Panasonic's first player is expected to sell for closer to $1,000 when it hits the Australian shelves in September. So Alex, Microsoft saying if you don't upgrade to Windows 10 by the end of July, they're going to want $179 for it. Is that going to help, or is it going to make it worse for people who haven't upgraded yet?
Look, I think, honestly, if you haven't upgraded yet, you've got some kind of fairly good reason, and there are some good reasons not to upgrade. If you're on particularly old hardware, there's not a huge reason to particularly push your system that much harder anyway. You
might be relying on specialist hardware or software or something that just doesn't want to work with a new operating system.
Absolutely, and exactly, yeah. So, and in those situations, it's not a really going concern. For people buying new systems, it's probably more of a concern, just because post-July, you should find that there'll be machines coming with more machines coming with Windows 10 native. Obviously, there are machines with Windows 10 native now, but anything sitting on a shelf with 7 or 8 on it, you might want to kind of hurry up and upgrade, because I don't know there's going to be much of a grace period in that, given it's been free anyway. Yeah. But beyond that, I mean, I don't know that this is actually going to impact all that many people in a serious way. It sounds like a big kind of shock price thing, from free to $179 in the space of a day. But the reality is that people will have had a year to do this upgrade. Any new machine is likely to come with it. And of course, for new machines, it's not going to cost you $179 as part of the price, because that's all in the Windows OEM pricing anyway, which is typically like $5 to $10 for a copy anyway. So I don't think it's going to have a huge impact. Inevitably, there will be people who get caught out by this who haven't done the upgrade. What will be really interesting to see, though, is Microsoft's been really aggressive with people running Windows 7 and Windows 8 in terms of the little pop-ups that they get. And we've talked about this before.
Pushy and deceptive is perhaps the word you're looking for.
Well, you see, I don't want to get the lawyers involved, but you're probably right. But the thing there is, of course, what do they do when it's no longer free? Because when it's free, yeah, you can kind of go, well, look, yeah, you can kind of push that my way, and fair enough, it's not actually going to cost me any money. As soon as it becomes advertising for a paid product, well, there are rules around that, and for that matter, you do run the risk of, really seriously ticking people off. Of course, it also raises this interesting question about what the real value of an operating system is, because if you buy Apple hardware, well, as long as the system can run it, then the OS software upgrades are free. And of course, on the Linux side of the fence, outside of supported packages, that's all open source and free. Do you think that the future of operating systems has a price ticket attached to it?
Yeah, I think this is kind of a line in the sand. This might be the last version of Windows that you see an upfront cash price for. When you can see how keen they are to throw themselves behind the $10 a month Office 365 pricing. If they can get people to look at desktop operating systems the same way, I'm sure they'd be very happy to get us paying $10 a month, or they might even bundle the two things together. That would actually make a lot of sense. Pay $15 a month and get the latest version of Windows and the latest of Office. I reckon that is probably what we'll be looking at by the time we get to what you may or may not call Windows 11.
See, I could see them perhaps saying, if you're an Office 365 subscriber, yeah, you get new Windows for free.
Maybe. Yeah.
But they don't do full Windows updates fast enough, I think, to make that a particularly viable proposition, unless they go over to this Apple model of having a new version of the OS pretty much every year. So, Adam, Google I/O, their big developer conference, is due to take place shortly, and you're heading there to see what it is that they're going to reveal. But the rumour mill's already churning on what those things might be, isn't it?
Oh yeah, the rumour mill never stops when it comes to things like this. This is, as you say, a developer conference. So a lot of it is actually aimed at people who make hardware or software or services designed to work with Google.
The really clever people.
Yes, but they do have your keynote speech, and they make a few announcements and stuff like that. So the thing that we're most likely to see is an update for the Nexus 7 tablet, the 7-inch tablet. It's been a couple of years. The last two have been very impressive and very aggressively priced for the quality that they are. So that'll be the one that people will be watching out for. We should learn more about the
What's interesting there, though, just to interrupt you, what's interesting there, of course, is that in the intervening period, because you're right, it's been a few years since there's been a Nexus tablet, but in the intervening period, they've shifted the Nexus brand from being that same kind of high-power, quite affordable model to being a high-power, high-price model. So whether or not they go that way, which is obviously what they did with their Pixel tablets as well, remains to be seen. I think that'll be a real sticking point, especially because the sales of tablets worldwide really have flattened out. And I think that's largely because, of course, unlike phones, people just don't break tablets that often. And they're using them for many of the same consumption tasks. So buying a tablet, it can last you 2, 3 or more years.
Well, they kind of need to make a decision, and this is a decision that Apple had to make, a decision that Amazon had to make with their Kindles, is do we want to push the prices down to make it a commodity item and just getting a price war to the bottom, or do we want to push the prices up and actually make it a luxury item? When you look at the new Kindle Oasis, is $450, right? Because they decided not to get into a $25 race to the bottom with Kobo, but actually make a top shelf Kindle for people who've got money to spend. So Google's kind of having to make,
really.
More money to spend than they know what to do with. And the same with iPads. They didn't get in a race to the bottom with Android. They know that they can charge a premium and that people will pay it. So Google kind of has to make that decision where maybe it wants to have a Pixel branding and a Nexus branding into going in two different directions, but they kind of have to decide, do we want to go that original Nexus idea of cheap but not nasty, or do we want to go for that premium, both premium build and premium price tag? And the people who do really well seem to be the ones who actually say, no, we're actually going to charge more for a premium product rather than get into a race to the bottom.
Now, the other thing that should be on the new Nexus 7 and indeed on the rumoured new Nexus phones, although I'd be very surprised if they did anything significant with them at I/O, is the next version of Android N. What do we know about that?
We know it's called N. I think we're waiting to find out what N's going to stand for. What do you think? What should we make N?
Well, look, I mean, traditionally, of course, they've generally been sweets, so we've had Kit Kat and Marshmallow and so on. N is a little bit trickier.
Nutella.
Nice biscuits. Google, Android Nigel, perhaps.
Nigel, yeah, that's got a nice ring to it.
Yeah,
right.
Android
we'll
Nigel.
We'll make it Nigel for now until they can top that. So we should hear more about Android Nigel. As you say, that maybe if there is a new Nexus 7 tablet, that's likely to be one of the first devices to run it, because Google builds their hardware. Because Google have partners who build most of their hardware, your Android updates aren't automatically available to everybody the same way that they are with Apple, because Apple controls the entire ecosystem. So it is Google's own devices, or someone like Motorola who they own, and while they build their own phones, they're very close.
Well, they used to own Motorola, they then sold them to Lenovo.
Actually, sorry, you're right. They did own it. It was in and was out, but there's still Motorola's always gone for a very stuck with the vanilla kind of Android interface. They haven't spruced it up too much, which means they can roll out those updates faster, whereas someone like Samsung, who likes to add all these bells and whistles, means when Android Nigel comes out, they won't necessarily be able to throw it on all their devices straight away. So that's why a Nexus device, basically a Google issued device, regardless of who built it, is likely to be the first to get these kind of updates.
Yep. So while While Google's making plans for Nigel, they're also apparently making plans for self-driving cars. Do you think they're going to make a big song and dance about that at I/O as well?
I don't think so. From what I can see, I think a lot more of their focus is on things like virtual reality and augmented reality. There are a lot of sessions in on those for developers, and talk that they might look at the next version of how they're doing the mental blank. The Google Cardboard. I was going to say those cardboard things. It's because it's called Google Cardboard. What they're going to do next with whether there'll be their own hardware or something like that. So that's, I think, where more of the focus is going to be. You might hear stuff about cars, but I don't think it's going to be as big a focus as some of the other things.
Yeah, well, I mean, the AR/VR space, and again, we've discussed this quite a bit, is something that a lot of people are putting a lot of effort into. Whether or not consumers are going to jump that way remains to be seen, although Google's particular take on it with Cardboard has always been that incredibly low-cost, quite lo-fi effort. Yeah. Its higher-end kind of AR stuff was, of course, Google Glass, and, remember Google Glass?
Yes.
It was a thing once upon a time.
Yes.
So maybe we'll get Google Glass 3.0, I don't know.
I don't think we'll get... I think we will get whatever they learnt from getting Google Glass wrong. We'll see that. They're just not going to call it Google Glass. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they up their game in terms of VR. But it's also in terms of, integrated with other apps and integrated with devices and making it more of something that you'll use every day. There's even talk of it being basically baked into Android Nigel. So it's there under the bonnet, easier for third-party apps and services to use. So I think this is going to be, particularly because you've got the Oculus Rift and the PlayStation Vive the HTC Vive and the PlayStation 1. It's really taking off, and so they kind of want to ride that wave, I think. All right, Alex, what the hell is VoLTE, and why should we care?
Okay, so VoLTE is voice over LTE, and it is what it says on the tin, really. It's delivering voice over mobile devices, so smartphones, essentially speaking, using the LTE, that's the 4G networks, as opposed to the existing 3G GSM networks, which is your traditional mobile phone technology. And it's something that Telstra switched onto its networks last year. Vodafone did likewise in a limited fashion last year and is continuing, and I believe should be finishing its rollout as per its schedule, I think by the end of this month. And Optus has just this week announced and patted itself on the back because it started rolling out voice over LTE to limited metro areas. So it's a technology that is, depending on your network, either here or here soon. Also depending on your device, because you have to have a device, essentially a reasonably premium, reasonably recent smartphone that supports the voice over LTE standard as well. Yeah.
So what's that? But it varies between telcos as well. It's like the few of the most recent iPhones, few of the most recent Samsung, some of the Sony Xperia handsets. But at the moment, I think Optus are only supporting 2 Samsung handsets, and so it might expand over time. So just because your phone has voice over LTE written in the specs doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work. Plus, you also, as you say, need to be in the coverage area. It needs to be switched on where you are. And I think switched on where the person you're calling is as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, it is one of those things that in some ways, for a certain subset of users, will probably be fairly invisible. It's not as though you've got to say, I want to make a voice over LTE call. It's just that will be the carrier transmission standard that you happen to use. Yeah. The advantages at the consumer end come down to a couple of things. Primarily, the way voice over LTE works is, right now, if you make a phone call and you're not on, for example, if you make a phone call on Optus and you're not inside these metro LTE areas, and I'm using Optus, which might feel unfair, but they're the last to the party, so they're the ones who get picked on. If you're using Optus in a non-LTE, but you're in a non-LTE voice over LTE area, but you're in a 4G area, when you make a voice call, you drop down to 3G. Your whole handset drops down to 3G.
Different radio, data and everything.
Data and everything, which means, of course, if you multitask, if in the middle of the call, the person you're calling says, well, what was the name of that guy who starred in Highlander? And you think, I'll just fire up my web browser and find out who it was, because you've forgotten it was Christopher Lambert. Then... Shame on you. Yeah, shame. But that being said, it happens. Then you would do that at 3G speeds. You would do that slower as a result. With a voice over LTE service, you don't change networks. So you've got that faster potential access. There can, depending on how it's configured, be some battery advantages because you're not running dual radios to try and kind of flick between these two things.
And you're not roaming. You're not searching for one and then searching for the other and then searching back for the first one again.
And it can be faster in terms of call conclusion. Not call conclusion. In terms of lining the call up. If you ever dialed someone,
good, gotta go. Bye.
And had that kind of 3 or 4 seconds while it thinks, oh right, well that's the number you've dialed. Now where would that be on the network? Now just let me think. You get that a lot faster instead.
Yeah.
And in theory, you also get slightly better voice quality. Although I don't know, again, because it's going to be fairly invisible to the end user. It's either going to happen or it's not. I don't know that too many end users are massively going to get excited over massive improvements in voice quality as long as the voice quality they get is already reasonable. Obviously, if you're in an area where every phone call you get is crackly nonsense, then any improvement is great.
Yeah.
But if you're in an area where generally the calls you get tend to go through and you can hear the other person, then having it in stereo is perhaps not that great a thing. I don't know.
Well, a lot of people got a call boost. In the last couple of years, the telcos have rolled out HD voice. So basically using a codec that can use wider frequency, so voices sound a bit more natural and you hear a bit more bass in the voice. So you might notice that there are certain people you call, you have the right handset, they have the right handset. They've sounded clearer in the last couple of years. So we're already getting towards that.
Yeah, there's a kind of an expectation thing there. And again, I think unless you were, for whatever purpose, recording that audio, so, you're a student and you're recording a phone call for an assignment or something, or you're a journalist like us, unless you're doing that kind of thing, it probably doesn't matter that much at a really high-end level. Obviously, at an able to communicate with someone level, it matters a bit more. So far, though, at least for voice over LTE in Australia, none of the carriers have come out and said, oh, well, this is a special extra feature that you have to pay more for. And realistically, they shouldn't, because it also actually makes things a lot simpler for them. It's a simpler network to configure because it's an LTE network they've already got. They can devote resources that are being used for voice calls elsewhere. It's probably a much bigger win for them than it is for us in a lot of ways.
Load off the 3G networks as well.
Yeah.
And so Telstra was talking about video calls over LTE later this year as well, yeah?
Yeah, they held a briefing session at Mobile World Congress for a bunch of Australian journalists that I was present, and they mentioned that video calling over LTE was something that they were also going to introduce later on this year. And again, they're talking up the quality of the connection and the quality of the video as being key things. And again, my head just says, look, this is not necessarily a bad thing. An additional feature is no bad thing. But I think it's something that people are already fairly used to anyway, because people already do Skype and FaceTime and Google Hangouts and those kind of things already. They're already used to those technologies. They're quite mature technologies now. Making, again, if video over LTE can make that better, then for a certain subset of people, especially for things like business calls, I could see that being a huge boon, because there's nothing worse than sitting in a video meeting and the person breaks up all the time.
I'm driving through the tunnel.
Exactly. So, there's some advantages there, although, of course, the downside there is video calling over LTE is video calling over a mobile network, which means that you are chewing up data, whereas for a lot of Skype or FaceTime calls, you might be sitting in someone's Wi-Fi cloud and using that, and that'll be significantly cheaper, if not, in fact, effectively no cost to you. So it'll be interesting to see how they promote it when they roll it out, and again, of course, it will depend on you having a handset, or handsets in this case, that support it at both ends. Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Remember, if you've got any comments, hit us up in the comments section on YouTube, via Twitter, or the Facebook Vertical Hold page.
Thanks for joining us, and remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button.